Black woman faces corrupt white cops in court. Then the FBI exposes their biggest secret. Step out of the car. The order came sharp and forceful, cutting through the silence of the deserted road. Ebony Davis tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her pulse quickening. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't broken any laws. But as the harsh glare of the flashlight blinded her, she knew this wasn't just a routine stop. Two officers, cold stares, hands hovering near their holsters. "What's the problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. No answer. Just another command. Now. Ebony exhaled slowly, her mind racing. She had spent years preparing for moments like this, just not from this side of the law. And what these officers didn't know, they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. And before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. Ebony Davis gripped the steering wheel with both hands, her knuckles whitening in frustration and a kernel of fear. The headlights of her old but well-maintained sedan cut through the inky darkness of the Virginia backroads. A single radio station played softly in the background, reporting the latest local news and upcoming weather. She tried to calm her breathing. This was supposed to be an ordinary drive home. She had taken a detour to avoid traffic on the main interstate. The night was quiet, with only a faint hush of wind sweeping across the fields. Suddenly, the red and blue lights of a police cruiser burst into her rearview mirror, casting ominous strobes into the car. Ebony frowned, glancing at her speedometer. She wasn't speeding. There were no broken headlights or expired registration to worry about. Everything was up to date. Despite that, she felt the creeping tension, that all-too-familiar sensation many black citizens experience when stopped by the police. She flipped on her right turn signal, carefully easing her sedan to the side of the deserted road. The cruiser pulled up behind her. In the mirror, she could see two uniformed officers stepping out, tall silhouettes under the flashing lights. Their movements were purposeful, almost aggressive. She rolled down her window. "License and registration," the first officer barked, shining a flashlight in her eyes. The intensity of the beam made her squint. Ebony offered a polite nod. "Good evening, officer." She forced her voice into calm, measured tones. "I'm going to reach for my license now, which is in my wallet." She could see the second officer approach on the passenger side, peering in as though expecting to see something incriminating. The tension in the air was palpable. "Let's not waste time with formalities," said the first officer, whose name tag read Grant. "What are you doing out here this late?" "I just took a detour home from work," Ebony explained, carefully pulling out her wallet. "Is there a problem with—" The second officer, Bowers, interrupted. "We'll decide if there's a problem. Now hurry up." Their tone set her on edge, but Ebony maintained her composure. She handed over her license and the registration. Officer Grant scrutinized the documents, then glanced at Ebony with a suspicious glare. "Step out of the car." Instinctively, Ebony's heart pounded. She asked carefully, "Could you tell me why?" "Ma'am, step out of the car," Bowers repeated, his hand edging toward the holster on his belt. Ebony complied. She popped the door open, stepping onto the pavement, the humid night air brushing against her skin. As she stood, she made a mental note. Stay calm. Don't antagonize them. Let them do what they think they need to. A part of her wanted to reveal who she really was, to watch their expressions change. But she couldn't. She had strict orders not to blow her cover unless absolutely necessary. The price for that revelation could be enormous. Grant stepped forward, scowling. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. You match the description." Ebony raised an eyebrow at the vague explanation. "Officers, if you could just check my license, you'll see I have no record. I'm on my way." She never finished the sentence. Bowers grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back in a painful hold. Ebony winced but did not resist. She knew that resisting, no matter how unfair the situation, would only escalate it. But the officer's aggression was blatant and unnerving. "Hey!" Ebony exclaimed. "Quiet!" Bowers snapped. "Stop resisting." The phrase, "stop resisting," sent a chill down Ebony's spine. She was all too aware that countless individuals had been targeted with that exact phrase to justify brutality. She stood perfectly still, making it clear she wasn't fighting back, but Bowers wrenched her arm higher, pain shooting through her shoulder. Grant watched with a smug expression. "All right, enough. There's no need for—" Ebony began, only for Bowers to give her a shove that nearly made her lose balance. "Turn around," Grant ordered, pulling out handcuffs. "Hands behind your back," Ebony complied. Her heart pounded, though her face revealed only a forced calm. "Remember your training," she told herself. "This is exactly the kind of scenario you were prepared for." Still, it took every ounce of her self-control not to push back. Grant read her the Miranda warning in a rushed, almost dismissive manner, as if he'd recited it 1,000 times on autopilot. Ebony's pulse thudded in her ears, but she kept her expression neutral. She had to trust that justice would eventually come from a higher place, perhaps ironically, from inside the very system these officers believed they controlled. "Booking her for resisting arrest and assaulting an officer," Bowers said, flipping Ebony around to face him. He sneered, his eyes dancing with hostility. "That's gonna look great on your record, sweetheart." Ebony parted her lips to speak, but decided silence might be the best approach. She felt a small pang of satisfaction at the irony that these men had no idea who they were dealing with. But that didn't make the night any less traumatic. She was ordered into the back of the police cruiser, the cuffs digging into her wrists. As the cruiser's door slammed shut, Ebony looked out through the mesh partition, her heart heavy. "This is my job," she reminded herself. "Investigating systemic corruption." She always knew the assignment would be dangerous. But as the squad car began its journey to the station, Ebony couldn't shake a nagging fear. What if the entire system here is more broken than I realized? She breathed out, trying to calm the swirl of conflicting emotions. Despite everything, Ebony Davis was determined not to let her cover slip. She would endure whatever came next. A storm was brewing in the near horizon, and Ebony was stepping directly into its path. The next morning, Attorney Maya Thompson walked into her modest law office, already juggling a stack of folders and a lukewarm cup of coffee. Maya was in her early 30s, with an unwavering sense of justice etched into her very being. She'd built a reputation for taking on difficult civil rights cases, especially those other lawyers deemed too controversial or less lucrative. As she settled into her desk, her phone buzzed. Maya's paralegal, a sharp-eyed college grad named Chris, poked his head through the door. "We've got a new case," he said. "I think you'll want to see this immediately." "What is it?" Maya asked, setting her coffee down. "An arrest last night. A woman named Ebony Davis. She claims she was pulled over without cause and mistreated. She's being charged with resisting arrest and assaulting an officer." Chris handed Maya a file with minimal information. Maya's eyes flicked over the details. "Just last night, huh? Usually it takes a while before someone finds their way here." She scanned Ebony's data. No criminal record, stable job history, no prior incidents. "This is suspicious." "Yeah, apparently it was a traffic stop. She says she never resisted, that the cops got aggressive immediately," Chris explained. Maya nodded, empathy stirring in her chest. "I'll head to the courthouse. She's probably being arraigned today." Within an hour, Maya was in the claustrophobic confines of a local courthouse's holding area, meeting Ebony for the first time. The woman sat on a hard plastic chair, cuffs around her wrists. Despite the tension of the situation, Ebony's expression was remarkably calm. She looked up at Maya, a glimmer of relief in her eyes. "Miss Davis," Maya began, introducing herself. "I'm Maya Thompson. I'm a defense lawyer who focuses on civil rights cases. A friend of yours reached out to my office." That was half true. Maya often got calls from local organizations whenever they heard about questionable arrests, but Ebony didn't have to know the exact details. "Can you tell me what happened?" Ebony let out a long breath, glancing briefly at a nearby guard. Lowering her voice, she explained the events of the night, detailing the aggressive behavior of officers Grant and Bowers, the forced arrest, the humiliating pat-down on the side of the road. Maya listened intently, reading Ebony's calm face, searching for any sign of deception. There was something about Ebony that intrigued her, an air of confidence, like she wasn't truly rattled, even if she had every right to be. Most clients in this position would be visibly panicked, or at least extremely anxious. Ebony's composure felt practiced, polished. That's pretty much it, Ebony concluded. I offered no resistance, and they still cuffed me, claimed I was assaulting them. I would like to clear my name. Maya nodded slowly. Of course, we'll fight these charges. There's likely dash cam or body cam footage from the officers. We can subpoena that. It should prove your version of events if it hasn't been tampered with. She paused, glancing at Ebony's neutral expression. There must be more to this story, though. You seem unusually collected. Ebony shrugged, her lips curving into a faint smile. I just have faith that justice will prevail, with the right representation. Maya eyed her, nodding carefully. All right, let's see about getting you released on bail. Then we'll build our case. Despite the gravity of the charges, Ebony's bail hearing went unexpectedly smoothly. The judge, known for a generally fair approach, agreed to a reasonable bond. Maya suspected there might be political undercurrents at play, but she was grateful Ebony wasn't going to spend a prolonged time locked up pending trial. Shortly after the hearing, Ebony stepped out of the courthouse, rubbing her wrists where the handcuffs had bitten into her skin. Maya walked alongside her, feeling the midday sun beating down. Let's get you somewhere safe, she offered. We need to go through every detail again so I can prepare for what's coming. Those officers aren't going to lie down and let this go. If anything, they'll double down on their version. Ebony bowed her head in gratitude. Thank you, Maya, I'd appreciate that. They strode toward the parking lot. Maya glanced over her shoulder. By the way, do you have any personal or professional connections that might help me build your defense? Any references, job supervisors, or the like who can vouch for your character? For a split second, Ebony tensed, but quickly she masked her reaction. I'll think about it. For now, let's just say I keep my circle small. Maya noted the half answer, but decided to let it lie. In her experience, some clients were simply private people. She reminded herself, don't push too hard yet. Earn her trust. As they drove away from the courthouse, Maya couldn't shake a feeling that Ebony's case was bigger than just a traffic stop gone wrong. Something about Ebony's unwavering calm signaled that she was no ordinary defendant. Maya suspected she'd soon find out why. That night, in a modest studio apartment in downtown Richmond, Ebony Davis shut the door behind her, turning all 3 locks. The quiet hum of a small air conditioner filled the space. She unbuttoned her shirt, revealing bruises on her arms where the officers had gripped her. She winced as she touched the sore spots. Reaching for her phone, Ebony keyed in a private code to open a secure communication app. After a few moments, a voice answered on the other line. A voice Ebony recognized as her FBI handler, Special Agent Caldwell. Agent Davis, Caldwell began formally. I saw the report come through. Are you all right? Ebony hesitated before answering, her tone controlled. I'm okay. A little bruised, but it could have been worse. The local cops pinned assault on me. Caldwell exhaled sharply. Unfortunate, but not entirely surprising. We've been hearing rumors that certain officers in that district have been engaging in heavy-handed tactics, especially toward African-American drivers. Now we have a first-hand account. Where does this leave your mission? She stepped farther into the apartment, checking the windows to ensure no one lurked outside. I can't blow my cover. The defense attorney, Maya Thompson, is good. She's already poking around. But for now, as far as she knows, I'm just a victim of police brutality. We can use this situation to our advantage. From the other end of the line, Caldwell's voice softened. Agreed, but be careful. If these officers find out you're FBI, it might escalate. They might have connections higher up. We're dealing with a potential ring of corruption, not just random racists on a small-town force. Ebony nodded to herself, recalling the hush-hush directives. She had been placed in this region months ago under the guise of a private citizen, investigating allegations that local law enforcement were falsifying evidence and extorting vulnerable residents. The bigger question was how far up the chain the corruption extended. "I'll proceed with caution. I'll keep you updated," Ebony said, ending the call. She set the phone on the table, her mind whirling with possibilities. She had to maintain her everyday persona, even in the face of mounting legal trouble. Her entire operation depended on staying undercover. Tired from the stress of the day, Ebony collapsed on her small sofa, the bruises aching. Despite her internal resolve, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of anger. They pulled me over with no cause, assaulted me, and now they want to ruin my name. They don't even know who I am. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, just as she had been trained at Quantico. She reminded herself that she did this job not for personal glory, but to expose the dark underbelly of corruption. If these cops are as dirty as I suspect, they'll hang themselves with their own lies in court. And if this goes higher, I'll bring it all down. Exhaustion overcame her. Tomorrow she'd return to Maya's office and begin crafting a defense. Ebony was certain the trial would open doors to the deeper secrets she had spent months trying to uncover. And if all went according to plan, the justice system, bolstered by her secret identity, would lay bare the racism and corruption that thrived in the shadows. Outside, in the corridor of her apartment building, two men in casual clothes lingered by the stairs. They weren't loitering by chance. They were plainclothes FBI agents assigned to keep an eye on Ebony's safety. She didn't know about them specifically, but she suspected she had watchers. She always did. The operation was too sensitive to risk losing her. With an entire ring of potential conspirators unaware that Ebony Davis was more than just a traffic stop statistic, the wheels of a much larger plan were already in motion. A few days later, Maya's office buzzed with activity. Phones rang, paralegals sifted through boxes of case files, and an air of urgency pervaded the space. Ebony sat across from Maya in a glass-walled conference room, the hum of conversation drifting from the hallway. "Here's what we have so far," Maya said, spreading out documents on the table. "We filed a motion to obtain the body cam and dash cam footage from Officers Grant and Bowers. If the footage hasn't been doctored or lost, it should show that you didn't resist." Ebony leaned forward, scanning the paperwork. Even as she flipped through the pages, her expression remained cool. Maya was intrigued by this. In her experience, defendants usually exhibit either desperation or confusion at this stage. Ebony, on the other hand, seemed almost clinical, as though she had done this before, or had at least studied it. "So how strong do you think our case is?" Ebony asked, her voice calm and steady. Maya inhaled, carefully considering her words. "If the footage is intact, it's very strong. But we have to be prepared for the possibility that the police might claim the footage is missing, or that the cameras malfunctioned. Sadly, that happens more often than you'd think." Ebony nodded, not surprised. They have a vested interest in protecting themselves. "What about witnesses?" she asked. "I've put out notices for potential witnesses who were driving by that night," Maya replied. "There weren't many cars on that stretch of road, though. Still, we might get lucky. Another angle is your impeccable record. No criminal history, no prior incidents. We'll highlight that in court." Ebony shrugged. "I was just driving home. They had no reason to pull me over." She took a breath. "Maya, do you think it might help if we push for a civil rights angle? Highlight the racial bias?" Maya's eyes flashed with interest. "Yes. If we prove they singled you out because you're black, that could add a civil rights violation to the case. But that can be tough to prove outright unless we have evidence of repeated misconduct by these officers or racist language on record." She paused. "By any chance, do you recall them using specific slurs?" Ebony pursed her lips, recalling the aggression in Grant and Bowers' voices. "They used demeaning language, calling me sweetheart and speaking to me like I was less than human, but no explicit slurs. Still, their attitude was clearly racially charged. If the footage caught their tone, that might be enough." "I hope so," Maya said with a weary sigh. I've seen too many cases where it's your word against theirs. Let's hope the cameras were rolling. As Ebony moved to gather her purse, the door to the conference room opened. Chris, the paralegal, peeked his head in. Maya, the prosecution just filed a new motion. They're asking to keep certain police records sealed. Maya's brow furrowed. Which records? It's not clear yet. Probably prior complaints against the officers. They don't want them made public or used in trial. Maya grimaced, frustration evident in her voice. They're trying to hide a pattern of behavior. Typical. She turned to Ebony. Well, Ebony, we'll fight to unseal those. If we can show these officers have a history of wrongdoing, it'll bolster our argument. Ebony stood, smoothing her skirt. Thank you for pushing this, Maya. Let's do what we have to do. A hint of a smile touched Maya's lips. I'm not one to back down from a fight. With that, Ebony left, carefully navigating the corridor outside. She was aware of the discreet glances from staff. Her story had started spreading around the local legal community. Yet again, Ebony walked out with her head high, her posture poised. She pretended not to notice two men in plain suits standing by the water cooler. She recognized them as the same watchers from before, the ones who had been at the courthouse. They were likely FBI, monitoring her at a distance. Ebony paid them no outward attention. She had a role to play as an ordinary defendant, just a woman fighting back against corrupt policing. Outside, Ebony slipped on her sunglasses and scanned the street. The sun beat down harshly, but she drew in a breath of determination. Soon this small skirmish in the court of law would blow open into a larger battle, and Ebony Davis intended to win, on every front. The day of Ebony's first formal court appearance arrived under a slate-gray sky, the kind that threatened rain at any moment. A small crowd of reporters and concerned citizens had gathered outside the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia in Richmond, spurred by rumors of yet another racially charged police incident. Typically, these preliminary appearances weren't big news, but word of Ebony's alleged assault on an officer had stirred local activists who suspected wrongdoing. Ebony stepped out of a ride-share car, wearing a simple, neat blazer. Maya joined her on the courthouse steps, deflecting a few questions from the media. Together, they navigated through the metal detectors inside, heading toward the assigned courtroom on the second floor. The corridors were bustling with attorneys, clerks, and defendants in suits or prison uniforms. But Ebony's case seemed to draw a particularly intense level of interest. Upon entering courtroom 3B, Ebony noticed two men in dark suits seated in the back. Their faces were impassive, but she recognized the vibe. FBI. They were not Caldwell or part of her immediate team, but colleagues who knew enough to remain covert. She gave the tiniest nod in their direction, then turned her attention to the prosecution's table. Officer Grant and Officer Bowers were there, accompanied by the district attorney and an assistant. The officers cut imposing figures with their pressed uniforms, but Ebony saw the flicker of something in their eyes. Unease, perhaps. All rise, the bailiff announced. The judge, an older man with white hair and a stern gaze, entered. Everyone sat down, the air thick with anticipation. The prosecution began by reading out the charges: resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer, and disturbing the peace. Ebony felt a flare of anger when they implied she had threatened the officers with violence. She gripped her pen, forcing herself to remain outwardly calm. Next, Maya stood. Your Honor, we plead not guilty on all counts. Her voice was strong and clear. Moreover, we intend to prove these charges were entirely fabricated by Officers Grant and Bowers, motivated by bias. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. The judge narrowed his eyes. I see. We will proceed with evidence, Miss Thompson. For now, let's set the schedule for the evidentiary hearing. The district attorney cleared his throat. Your Honor, the prosecution intends to present body camera footage demonstrating the defendant's aggressive behavior and refusal to comply. Maya's head snapped up. They actually plan to use footage? She'd half expected the footage malfunctioned excuse. This was a twist. Maybe they had edited it or cut parts out to paint Ebony in a bad light. Fine, the judge replied. We'll see that footage at the evidentiary hearing. For now, let's proceed with standard procedure. Court is adjourned for today." As the gavel banged, Ebony felt the tension release a fraction. People stood, some hurrying out, others clustering to chat. Maya leaned close to Ebony. "We'll have to review that footage as soon as possible. The prosecution's confidence might be a bluff, but they must have something that makes them believe they can spin the narrative." Ebony nodded quietly. "We'll counter with the truth." Across the room, Officer Grant caught Ebony's eye. He gave a smirk, the kind that said, "You don't stand a chance." Ebony calmly returned his gaze, refusing to flinch. She made a mental note of his body language and the mocking tilt of his chin. As Ebony and Maya exited the courtroom, they found themselves swarmed by a few local reporters. "Miss Davis, care to comment on these allegations?" one asked, thrusting a microphone forward. "Is it true you assaulted the officers?" Maya stepped in before Ebony could respond. "My client looks forward to a fair trial. We believe the body cam footage will vindicate her." She gently guided Ebony away from the throng. Once outside, Ebony spotted the men in dark suits again, lingering near a pillar. They appeared to be talking into earpieces. A sense of both comfort and burden washed over her. She wasn't alone, but the stakes were about to get much higher. What else is the FBI waiting to reveal? She wondered. For now, Ebony had to remain in the role of a citizen fighting for justice, at least until the time was right to bring the bigger revelations to light. In the days leading up to the evidentiary hearing, Maya immersed herself in research. Stacks of legal books, case files, and police records littered her desk. She was determined to expose any inconsistencies in the officer's account. Ebony sat in an armchair across from her, occasionally sipping coffee or making notes. "You're going to have to take the stand at some point," Maya said, flipping through her legal pad. "We need to be sure your story is consistent and detailed. The prosecution will try to trip you up." Ebony nodded. "I understand. I'm ready. I'll walk you through some cross-examination scenarios. They'll likely ask why you didn't comply immediately. They'll paint you as combative. Let's see how you respond." Maya took on a stern tone, mimicking a prosecuting attorney. "Miss Davis, why did you refuse the officer's lawful command?" Ebony, playing along, answered calmly, "I never refused. I asked why they were stopping me. A question is not refusal." Maya scribbled a note. "Good. Follow up. Isn't it true that you raised your voice at the officers, creating a hostile environment?" Ebony raised an eyebrow, her response measured. "I was speaking in a normal tone. If the officers felt threatened, perhaps it was because of their own prejudice." Maya paused. "That's borderline. The judge might interpret that as an attack on the officer's character. Let's rephrase to something less provocative but still firm." Ebony nodded, readjusting her posture. "I'll keep it calm." Though they continued practicing, Ebony's mind occasionally drifted. She was balancing two roles, the victim of a corrupt arrest and an undercover FBI agent with a mission that extended beyond her personal case. Each time she answered Maya's mock questions, she had to ensure she wouldn't inadvertently reveal her training and background. After a grueling 2-hour session, Maya placed her pen down and sighed. "You're a quick study. Usually clients are terrified by this point, but you handle the questions with ease. It's almost like you've dealt with interrogations before." Ebony forced a light chuckle. "I guess I'm just not easily rattled." Maya studied her for a moment, clearly intrigued but too polite to push further. "Well, it's definitely an asset in court." They wrapped up their session, and Ebony gathered her purse. As she left, she noticed Chris, the paralegal, quietly handing Maya a folder labeled Confidential. Curious, Ebony quickly cast her eyes away. She didn't want to appear nosy, but the label told her it could be something significant, possibly the unsealed records of Officer Grant and Bowers or some other piece of key evidence. "Thank you, Maya," Ebony said as she exited. "I'll see you in court." Once outside the law office, Ebony took a quick detour behind the building, pulling out her phone. She dialed Caldwell on the secure line. "Any updates from your end?" Caldwell spoke tersely. "We've managed to compile some internal affairs complaints about those officers. but the local police department is stonewalling. Might need a federal subpoena if we want to blow it open. However, we have a bigger concern. Some folks in the district attorney's office might be complicit in covering up police misconduct. We need more proof. Ebony's breath caught. The DA's office too? Possibly. Tread carefully. We've also caught wind that your arrest might have been deliberate, an attempt to intimidate you or push you out. They might suspect you're more than you claim to be. Ebony glanced around the empty alley behind the office. I haven't let anything slip, but I'll be cautious. Thanks for the intel. She hung up and slipped the phone into her pocket. Walking to her car, Ebony tried to keep her emotions in check. The corruption might be more rampant than she'd realized. She thought about Maya, who was fighting the legal battle without knowing the half of it. A pang of guilt hit Ebony. Maya was risking her reputation and possibly her safety for what she thought was a straightforward police misconduct case. If only she knew the full extent. But Ebony had to remain silent for the operation's sake. Tomorrow was the evidentiary hearing. Ebony steeled herself, knowing the next time she faced Officers Grant and Bowers in the courtroom, the stage would be set for an explosive confrontation. Bring it on, she thought. The truth can only stay hidden for so long. Morning arrived crisp and overcast, a light drizzle coating the courthouse steps. Inside, the tension was high as Ebony and Maya prepared for the evidentiary hearing. The gallery was more crowded than before, with local civil rights activists, reporters, and curious onlookers taking their seats. At the prosecution's table, the district attorney whispered to Officers Grant and Bowers, who looked stern in their uniforms. Judge Martinez, a dignified figure in robes, took the bench. After initial formalities, the DA stood. Your Honor, the state would like to present body camera footage from the night of the incident, which shows the defendant resisting arrest and physically assaulting Officer Bowers. There was a hush in the room. Maya glanced at Ebony, who remained poker-faced. The DA approached a TV monitor set up beside the judge's bench. He inserted a flash drive and a video began to play. The footage was grainy but audible. It showed Ebony's car on the side of the road, headlights illuminating the asphalt. Officer Grant's voice could be heard ordering Ebony out of the vehicle. It showed Ebony stepping out. Then the camera panned abruptly, as if the officer wearing it had jerked to the side. The image became skewed. Suddenly, Ebony was off-screen for a few seconds. Words were exchanged, mostly muffled. Then the footage stabilized, showing Ebony's hands behind her back. Stop resisting, Bowers' voice rang out on the recording. In the video, Ebony was partially blocked by the officer's torso, making it hard to see her movements clearly. The prosecution paused the video. You can hear the officer's commands indicating the defendant was resisting. We believe this constitutes assault given the officer's repeated warnings. Maya tapped her pen on her notebook, visibly unimpressed. Objection, Your Honor. There's no clear visual of my client resisting or assaulting anyone. The judge nodded. Sustained. Let's see the rest of the footage. The video resumed, showing Ebony in handcuffs. The interaction ended with Ebony being placed in the squad car. There was no obvious sign of Ebony hitting or pushing an officer, but the footage was ambiguous enough that the DA could spin a narrative. Once the video ended, the DA turned off the monitor. Maya stood, adjusting her jacket. Your Honor, as you and everyone in this courtroom can see, the footage does not confirm an assault. It only provides the officer's claim that Miss Davis was resisting. We see no physical action from her consistent with assault. We move to dismiss the charges on that basis. The DA shot back. The vantage point may be compromised, but the officer's statement in real time, stop resisting, speaks volumes. Officers don't make that up out of thin air. Oh, but they do, Ebony thought darkly. Judge Martinez frowned. I see insufficient clarity to accept or dismiss these charges on the footage alone. I need more evidence. He turned to Maya. Miss Thompson, do you intend to present anything further in this hearing? Maya exchanged a quick glance with Ebony and then said, We intend to show a pattern of misconduct from these officers. We've secured documents indicating past complaints and excessive force allegations against Officers Grant and Bowers. Unfortunately, the DA's office filed a motion to seal some of these records. but we ask the court to unseal them in the interest of justice." The DA's face hardened. "Your Honor, these sealed records are unrelated to this case. They could prejudice the jury by painting the officers in a bad light with unsubstantiated claims." Judge Martinez steepled his fingers. "I'll review the documents in camera, privately. If I find them relevant, I'll allow them to be used at trial. Until then, the motion to unseal is under advisement." Though no definitive resolution emerged from the hearing, there was a distinct shift in the atmosphere. Officers Grant and Bowers looked restless. Their false confidence had waned as the judge hinted that their past records might be scrutinized. After the gavel concluded the session, Ebony and Maya walked down the aisle toward the exit. Ebony caught sight of the two men in dark suits again. One gave the slightest nod. It was time to move forward with the next phase. Ebony pressed her lips together, mentally preparing. If the court unsealed the officers' records, it would help the case, but Ebony was gunning for a much larger exposure. As Ebony and Maya stepped outside into the drizzle, a small cluster of reporters rushed forward. Cameras flashed, capturing Ebony's stoic expression. Maya fielded questions with poised professionalism. Ebony said nothing, letting her lawyer speak for her. Inwardly, Ebony found herself counting the days until she could reveal the truth, how she'd been assigned to bust corrupt cops, not just sue for wrongful arrest. But that moment had not yet arrived. For now, Ebony Davis remained a mysterious defendant, preparing for a trial that promised to rock the foundations of local law enforcement, and perhaps more. Late that afternoon, Maya arrived home, exhausted from the hearing and the media frenzy outside. She tossed her blazer onto a chair, sank into her couch, and turned on the TV. The local news was already covering Ebony's case, featuring a brief clip of the body cam footage. The reporters delivered their typical spin, uncertain whether Ebony was a victim or a perpetrator. Maya sighed, turning off the TV. She was startled to see her phone screen light up with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A hushed voice spoke. "Is this Maya Thompson?" "Yes, who's speaking?" A pause. "Let's just say I have information about your case, off the record. If you're interested in blowing the lid on a whole lot more than just Ebony Davis's arrest, meet me tonight at the coffee shop on 5th and Marshall. 9 p.m., come alone." The line went dead. Maya felt a surge of adrenaline. This could be a trick or a wild goose chase, but her gut told her there was something genuine behind that voice. She jotted down the details and decided to go. At 9 p.m., she entered the dimly lit coffee shop, scanning the patrons. In a corner booth sat a man with his baseball cap pulled low. Maya recognized him as one of the officers in street clothes from the courthouse, though she couldn't recall his name. She approached slowly. He motioned for her to sit, his eyes darting around the nearly empty shop. "I can't talk long. I just needed someone to know. Things aren't right in the precinct. Grant and Bowers. They've been involved in shady dealings for years. Evidence tampering, false arrests, harassing people of color. I've seen it." Maya leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Why come to me now?" He swallowed. "Because Ebony Davis. I think they messed with the wrong woman. They don't realize who she might be connected to. I heard rumors, and I'm scared this is going to blow up, and the precinct is going to try to make me a scapegoat." Maya's mind raced. "Do you have evidence? Proof of these allegations?" The man fidgeted, pulling out a thumb drive from his jacket pocket. "Body cam footage, unedited, some internal memos. This is all I could gather without drawing attention. If you can use it to stop them, do it. But don't mention my name, don't ever mention this meeting, or I'm as good as fired, or worse." Before Maya could respond, he stood up, downed the last of his coffee, and left the shop. She gripped the thumb drive in her hand, stunned. Could this be legitimate? If the files on here were genuine, it might prove a pattern of police corruption well beyond Ebony's case. She hurried home and plugged the drive into her laptop. Sure enough, there were folders labeled internal memos, incidents, and complaint files. Maya's eyes widened at the endless PDFs of complaints, many from minority drivers. Some had been dismissed with no investigation. Some contained statements from high-ranking officials at the precinct, urging caution to protect the officers. There was also a video folder, footage from Bowers's body cam that, from the timestamps, looked like it was from the same night Ebony was arrested, but it was longer than the footage the DA had shared. She clicked on it and watched, her heart clenched. In this unedited version, Ebony was clearly cooperating. She even said, "I'm not resisting," while Bowers grabbed her arm and twisted it. The assault was nowhere to be seen. Not once did Ebony raise a hand in aggression. The difference was night and day compared to the carefully cut version played in court. Maya stared at her screen, a flurry of emotions swirling inside her. They doctored evidence. They lied under oath. This was bigger than Ebony's single case. The entire justice system in the district might be complicit. She snapped her laptop shut, a pulse of anxiety beating in her temples. What if they come after me? She had to tread carefully. Maybe she should let Ebony know. But Ebony was still a client, and any major moves had to be strategic. If they revealed this too soon, the officers might find ways to discredit it, or someone higher up in the DA's office might bury it. Despite her own fears, Maya felt a powerful sense of purpose. She was doing what she'd dedicated her life to, uncovering truth, demanding justice. Ebony Davis deserved better than a rigged system. Maya was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The trial began with a media storm. The gallery was packed, not just with local residents, but also with activists from neighboring cities. People were tired of systemic injustice and pinned their hopes on Ebony's case as a turning point. Officers Grant and Bowers strutted into the courtroom, projecting confidence. The district attorney and his assistants flanked them, wearing resolute expressions. Ebony arrived with Maya, who carried a stack of documents and a determined glint in her eye. The unedited footage was now her trump card. She had debated revealing it immediately, but decided to wait until the perfect moment to confront the officers on the stand. Judge Martinez presided, calling the court to order. Opening statements commenced. The DA painted Ebony as an irate driver who antagonized the officers. He described the strain on law enforcement and how non-compliant suspects put everyone at risk. Ebony clenched her fists under the table, resisting the urge to roll her eyes at the blatant spin. Then Maya rose for her opening statement. She spoke passionately about the importance of truth, about Ebony's rights, and about the intimidation tactics that some officers employ against black drivers. She hinted that shocking evidence would soon be presented. Once both sides finished, the prosecution called Officer Bowers to the stand. He recounted his version of events. Ebony was belligerent, refused to show her license, and resisted once he tried to cuff her. He claimed she even pushed him, though he admitted there was no clear video of that specific push. Maya's cross-examination was surgical. She led Bowers through minute details, making him confirm step by step what he did and did not do. Finally, she said, "Officer Bowers, you testified there is no clear video of Miss Davis's alleged push. Why not?" "Body cam angles sometimes don't capture everything," Bowers replied, frowning. "But I was there and she pushed me." Maya gave a faint smile. "I see. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to introduce a new piece of evidence that we obtained through a whistleblower within the police department. It's an unedited version of Officer Bowers's body cam footage." The judge arched an eyebrow. The DA sputtered protests, claiming they had not received this evidence through official discovery channels. But Maya argued the police had withheld it. After a brief legal discussion, the judge allowed it to be shown. All eyes turned to the large monitor. The unedited footage played. It showed Ebony cooperating, asking calmly why she was stopped, then willingly stepping out of the car. Bowers's aggression was blatant. He ignored Ebony's compliance and shouted, "Stop resisting," even though Ebony was standing still. The footage conclusively showed Ebony never pushed or struck the officer. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Journalists whispered to each other, some typing furiously on phones or laptops. Then, from the gallery, a murmur of outrage rose. Judge Martinez slammed his gavel. "Order in the court!" Maya turned back to Bowers. Officer, can you explain why the footage you and the district attorney provided was edited to remove these critical moments? Bowers looked like a cornered animal. I didn't. Someone must have. The footage was... Maya didn't let him finish. Isn't it true, Officer Bowers, that you fabricated your narrative and that Miss Davis never assaulted you? He squirmed, sweating visibly. She was resisting verbally, and I felt threatened. The damage was done. The gallery erupted in whispers again. Even the DA looked furious. Whether at Bowers for lying or at Maya for exposing them, nobody could say for certain. Now it was Ebony's turn on the stand. She recounted the night calmly and clearly. The unedited video supported her account. The prosecution scrambled, but their case had already crumbled. After Ebony's testimony, Maya asked her a final question. Miss Davis, given the enormous risk of going against police officers, why did you insist on fighting these charges? Ebony gazed at the jury, then at the judge, her eyes reflecting a quiet resolve. Because I believe in justice, and I knew I was innocent. From the back of the courtroom, one of the dark-suited men rose. Ebony recognized him as Special Agent in Charge Vernon, Caldwell's superior. He walked to the front, handing the judge an official folder. The judge read the papers, his eyes widening. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Martinez announced, beckoning Ebony's lawyer and the DA to approach. I have here a notice from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It states that Ebony Davis is in fact a special agent with the FBI, working undercover to investigate systemic police corruption in this region. This has direct bearing on this trial. A deafening wave of gasps and chatter swept the courtroom. Officer Grant and Officer Bowers looked as if someone had smashed them over the head with a sledgehammer. The district attorney's jaw dropped. Maya spun to look at Ebony, disbelief and awe mingling on her face. Ebony returned her gaze apologetically. I couldn't risk exposing it before, she whispered. Judge Martinez banged his gavel for order. We will take a brief recess to discuss the implications of this revelation with counsel. The trial was in chaos, but the truth was finally coming to light. Ebony, still standing in the witness box, felt a rush of relief. The cat was out of the bag. Now perhaps justice would be served not just for her, but for all those who had suffered under corrupt policing. The court resumed an hour later. The tension multiplied. The judge announced that the FBI had been conducting a broader investigation into multiple alleged civil rights violations by local law enforcement. The presence of Ebony Davis, an undercover agent, was just the tip of the iceberg. With Ebony's cover blown, Special Agent in Charge Vernon requested permission to make a statement. Judge Martinez, though unorthodox, allowed it, given the extraordinary circumstances. Stepping to the front, Vernon addressed the court. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been monitoring a suspected corruption ring in this district for over a year. We have credible evidence linking Officers Grant and Bowers, and potentially others, to falsifying police reports, planting evidence, and targeting minority communities. Miss Davis was placed undercover to gather first-hand proof. A wave of stunned gasps rippled through the spectators. Some in the jury exchanged wide-eyed glances. The DA looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Grant and Bowers turned ashen. The FBI will be filing charges at the federal level, Vernon continued. We have sealed indictments against individuals in the local precinct and potentially in the district attorney's office who conspired to protect these officers. The judge nodded grimly. In light of this new information, the state's case against Ebony Davis is dismissed with prejudice. I further instruct that Miss Davis be released from any bail obligations immediately. Court is adjourned on this matter. The gavel's strike echoed like a thunderclap. Cheers broke out in the gallery. Maya practically flew to Ebony's side, hugging her. I knew there was something special about you, she said, voice trembling with emotion. Ebony smiled warmly. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you before. You've done so much for me. Moments later, a swarm of reporters surrounded them. Cameras flashed in Ebony's face, while Maya tried to shield her from the most aggressive journalists. Miss Davis, how long have you been FBI? Are you pressing charges against the officers? What happens next? Ebony offered a measured response. All I can say is justice has to be served. Today was a critical step. Officer Grant and Officer Bowers were led out by federal marshals, no longer the proud figures they were at the trial's start. The crowd booed and jeered as they passed. Both wore stunned expressions, as though they couldn't comprehend how quickly their world had collapsed. Outside, the press conference was a spectacle. FBI officials laid out the basic details of the corruption probe, though they withheld deeper specifics, citing ongoing investigations. Maya gave a statement praising Ebony's courage and calling for comprehensive reforms. Meanwhile, Ebony stood off to the side, quietly observing the storm she had ignited. Caldwell appeared, giving her a discreet thumbs up. She knew her assignment wasn't over. The local police force would face a massive shakeup, and the DA's office might see resignations or arrests. But Ebony felt a sense of triumph. By willingly facing trial as an ordinary citizen, she had exposed the wrongdoing from within. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of changes. Several high-ranking officers resigned or were placed under investigation. The district attorney faced calls for a formal inquiry into his role. The mayor announced plans for a new citizen oversight board to monitor police conduct. Local news ran stories nightly about Ebony Davis, the undercover FBI agent who dared to stand against a corrupt system. Maya's law firm was inundated with new cases from people claiming they too had been falsely charged or harassed by the corrupt officers. Overwhelmed but determined, Maya led the charge, working tirelessly to seek justice for them. Her office grew in size and reputation, buoyed by donations from civil rights groups and supporters of police reform. On a calm morning, Ebony visited Maya in her new, larger office. This time, Ebony wore a well-fitted FBI blazer. No need for secrecy anymore. Maya looked up from her desk, smiling. "You look official now," Maya teased, leaning back in her chair. Ebony returned the smile. "I wanted to thank you in person. You went above and beyond, defending me without knowing I had the entire federal apparatus behind me. That took real courage." Maya shrugged, modest. "I did what any lawyer with a conscience would do. But I have to admit it was quite a surprise when the truth came out." Ebony reached into her pocket, pulling out a small envelope. "Here's something for you," she said, handing it over. Inside was a letter of commendation from the FBI, acknowledging Maya's instrumental role in exposing police corruption. Maya's eyes glistened as she read it. "Thank you. This means a lot." They exchanged a quiet moment of mutual respect. Then Ebony cleared her throat. "I'm being reassigned to a new case. Another city, another undercover op. Corruption doesn't stop, so neither can I." Maya stood, offering her hand. "You know where to find me if you need any help. Always happy to fight the good fight." They shook hands, a silent oath that they would continue pushing for justice in their own ways. Ebony left the office, stepping into the bright morning light. She took a moment to inhale deeply. So much had changed since her arrest on that lonely stretch of road. She had walked into the lion's den and emerged triumphant, not just for herself but for a community too long preyed upon by those sworn to protect. As she made her way down the bustling street, Ebony's phone buzzed. A text from Caldwell. "Next assignment meeting at HQ. See you soon." She smiled, tucking the phone away. One chapter of her life was closing, but her crusade against corruption was far from over. Down the block, protesters held signs demanding continued reform in the police department. Others chanted Ebony's name, praising her courage. She felt a surge of humility. This victory belonged to everyone who dared to demand a fair and honest system. Climbing into a waiting SUV, Ebony glanced at the file on the passenger seat labeled with a new city's name. Her next mission awaited, but she carried the lessons from this case in her heart. Stand firm, keep faith in true justice, and never underestimate the power of the truth to shatter even the mightiest walls of corruption. With that resolve, Ebony drove off, ready for whatever lay ahead. Justice had been served. The officers who thought they could manipulate the system had been exposed. The courtroom, once filled with arrogance and deception, now echoed with the weight of undeniable truth. As Ebony Davis walked out of the courthouse, the world felt different, lighter. She had fought not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been silenced, mistreated, or told their story wouldn't matter. But this wasn't the end. The fight for justice never truly stops. There are still more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and that's why I need you to be part of this journey. If this story moved you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Justice is just getting started.